So for about 8 years, I've been training in a sport called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And for those of you that don't know, we do this sport in a kimono-like uniform called a gi. And the gi is crucial because it allows us to grab grips out of the fabric to achieve and maintain positions. Now, about a year ago, I was training at my home gym. I knew my partner, I felt fairly comfortable, and we began our round of sparring and he grabbed a sleeve grip, and that caused my sleeve to ride up my arm. It exposed lengthwise scars that run up and down my wrist, and he looked down at them, and without seeming to think about it, he said, "What, did you try to kill yourself or something?" I looked at him calmly and I said, "Yes." I could see the shock on his face. I could see the gears turning as he realized how gauche his question was, and I could see his surprise at getting an honest answer. That's because we don't talk about suicide. We don't talk about mental illness. I've often had people stare at my scars. They most often don't ask questions, but they're pretty fascinated. They kind of don't want to know, they kind of do want to know. Sometimes they'll give me a knowing look or pat me lightly on the shoulder, but mostly they don't ask questions. I once wrote in a poem, "I wear my insides carved into my outsides. The ugliest parts of me are on display, and people, well, they stare." This man stared because my scars are unusual. He stared because he couldn't understand them. He couldn't fathom how somebody would do that to themselves. Because we can't see mental illness, we refuse to acknowledge it. When confronted with it, we're awkward, we shy away, we lack compassion. Someone's brain chemistry doesn't show up on their skin or in their breathing or as a broken bone. And if we can't see it, then it mustn't exist. This is stigma. Stigma silences us. It stunts discussion and it stops us from speaking up. And the thing with stigma is that it's insidious. It creeps in slowly as we form more and more opinions and misconceptions, and it quickly becomes something much more dangerous. Stigma comes from two things. It comes from shame and it comes from guilt. And shame comes from the judgment placed on us by others, while guilt builds internally as we judge ourselves for what we perceive as shortcomings. But let's back up for a second. Let me ask you a simple question. How are you? Think about that for a moment. How many times a day are you asked this question? Questions are how we request information from the world. In social contexts, they're how we request information from each other. So think about that again. How are you? How many times in your daily routine are you confronted with this question? And how do you answer each time? We're constantly giving automatic, perfunctory replies assuring people that we're fine and good. But what are we accomplishing with this? Is there a true exchange of meaningful information there? We're essentially lying to each other. We're failing to share the full truth of what we're experiencing, and we're failing to share the full truth of what we're feeling. Because we've developed these social standards and boundaries around what's acceptable, what makes us overbearing or rude or awkward. And when it comes to mental health awareness, these social boundaries and standards are obstacles to overcome. Research has shown that talking about suicide openly, candidly, and out loud greatly reduces the chances of somebody with suicidal thoughts going through with an attempt. So what can we do? How do we change the norm? How do we address this stigma? Pushing the envelope means pushing limits. It means embracing radically different experiences that shift paradigms and help us learn and grow. It means changing for the better and gaining a deeper understanding to be able to better serve the society that we live in. And the shift that I'm proposing, it starts with you and me. It starts with everybody in this room. Each person in this room choosing to push the envelope of those social boundaries and of what's acceptable. And that's really the most powerful way to make headway when it comes to combating stigma and when it comes to mental health awareness. The last time that I tried to kill myself, I needed 14 stitches. The time before that, I was in a coma for days. I tell people that I didn't attend graduate school after my BA because I was sick. I tell them that I didn't start my career until my 30s because of medical issues. And while this is true, omitting the fact that these concerns were psychiatric avoids judgment. I once worked with a woman who said of her ex-husband, he spent 2 weeks in the psych ward. He's a total psycho. Now, spending 2 weeks in the critical care unit for a traumatic brain injury would never qualify you as such. That's because we don't give mental health patients the benefit of the doubt or the same respect. If I told someone that I didn't attend grad school because of a traumatic injury that required rehab, they would feel for me. They would ask how it happened, ask about my recovery, imagine the pain, the discouragement, all of the effort that went into that. If I told somebody I didn't attend grad school because of suicidal thoughts that led to a serious attempt, they would probably be taken a little aback. They wouldn't know what to say. There would be shock. There might be judgment. They would be making it fit within their paradigm of what is a medical illness and what warrants compassion. And so in many contexts, I avoid conversations about that part of my life. I know that a nondescript physical health issue is likely to bring sympathy and a modicum of understanding, while a mental health concern would be much harder to understand. This is one place where I need to continue to step up and face my fear of stigma and make strides towards mental health awareness. That is the paradigm to shift. We need to make suicide and mental illness appropriate topics of conversation to broach in standard conversation. There may be a caveat to this. There can be nuances to when it is effective to share these things, but what I'm aiming to change is that idea of appropriate versus inappropriate. Honesty, candidness, and true human emotion are always appropriate. If someone asks you how you are and you respond that you're dealing with severe anxiety, perhaps that can't be addressed in a 3-floor elevator ride, but it's still not inappropriate to give that honest answer. What needs to change is the reaction to it. If you answered that you were dealing with anxiety, the person might be taken aback a bit. They might think you're oversharing or being awkward. And that's because of one simple fact. Mental health and physical health are treated very differently. Think about it. If you were asked the same question and you answered you had a bit of a cold, that would be a perfectly commonplace answer. So let's try something else. How was your summer? Oh, well, I broke my arm. This answer wouldn't be off-putting. Again, the person would check in with your recovery, ask you how it happened, sign your cast maybe. How was your summer? Well, I had an episode of psychosis. It was really difficult. Most people wouldn't know how to respond to that. Most people wouldn't have the language or develop the tools to be able to talk around mental illness in a way that's helpful and compassionate. Many people might be more worried about their own discomfort with the topic rather than the opportunity to empathize with someone. And that's what it comes down to. We need to train ourselves in empathy. And empathy absolutely can be learned. Humans feel feelings. It's that simple. And we have an incredible propensity for feeling and connecting to what other people are feeling. We just sometimes need a little bit of guidance. We need to be comfortable with openness. We need to be comfortable with sharing and receiving both what we experience and what others experience. We need to become a safe space to be compassionate and empathetic and allow people to open up, which in turn gives them permission to seek support. And that reminds them that they're valuable, that they're worthy, that they deserve that support. I am diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder. Before being diagnosed, I knew very little about either of these illnesses. In fact, I'd never even heard of BPD before. I just knew that I was in pain, that I was different. I didn't really know how or why, which made it all the more overwhelming and scary. I've dealt with chronic suicidal thoughts, which I still struggle with, and these stem from intense psychological pain that I often feel I'm not strong enough to live through. I live in a world of highs and lows that can be very disruptive to my life. And my feelings are magnified, and the cooling down period after each of them is longer than that of a healthy brain. I lived like this for years, unaware that there was a reason for it. I saw most people around me living their life without crumbling at every onset of emotion, and I decided that I must be doing something wrong. I decided that if I tried harder, I could be better. I could be different. I could be normal. I lacked the education and the knowledge on mental health and mental illness to know that there was a name for what I was experiencing, and more importantly, that there was treatment, and that I deserved it. This is the challenge, pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable and what's appropriate, of what makes us socially adept. Mental health should be as ubiquitous in how we take care of ourselves and talk about ourselves as physical health. We need to talk about it, educate ourselves, be empathetic, compassionate, safe spaces for honesty both from ourselves and others. Through my recovery, I've become more comfortable with sharing my story because I hope that it will help someone. It will help somebody feel less alone. It might give a more human and real side of mental illness that'll help somebody understand better. Combating that stigma requires that open and honest conversation. We need to make mental illness an appropriate topic, something to check in about, something to learn about. If I can leave you with anything, I would encourage you to be open and brave. Open in receiving other people's struggles, other people's pain, other people's experiences, and brave in sharing your own. Mental health is health. Talk about it. You could easily save a life. Thank you.